start off with confession. I was quite nervous when I was given this subject matter to talk about. And the reason for that is, a couple of days later, on a Sunday, I was watching TV, and this film was on TV. It took me right back to being about 12 or 13 years old. And I was watching all these people going around this American town, flying around on hoverboards and in flying cars and with suits that kind of put themselves on, all sorts of stuff. And then I suddenly realized that this was made in 1985 and it was 30 years in the future, which means 2015, which is only 3 years from now. And I think the future is probably not going to look like that. And I think it kind of brings home to me, I think speakers this morning also said the same thing, trying to predict the future is really, really difficult. And that, in a way, is kind of the point of my presentation, because maybe we can take strategies that help us do that a little bit, but also take account of the fact that it's incredibly difficult to do. But really, bringing home to us how important it is for us to do that, a week or so later, you can get a flavour of my life here, I was in a hotel room in Stockholm watching the Swedish news channel, didn't really understand anything. And then suddenly I started seeing pictures from London, and it was on fire, and I was like, what on earth is going on there? And it kind of became clear that something was going on, like a riot or something, and we all know what's happened since. I think everyone's got their theory about why the riots happened, but it does tell us an awful lot about what's going on in society and things that we need to be on top of. Because the poor policemen were a bit like the kind of Keystone cops being thrown from one part of London to another by these people who were communicating on BlackBerry devices and using social media and so on to communicate with one another, kind of without a leader behind them. And if you think about it in a way, as insurers, we're liable to be in the same position if we don't actually monitor what customers are doing. I'm not saying they're all going to become rioters, but they are going to do things that maybe we don't understand. So how can we start in doing that, given I've said it's so unpredictable? So I thought I'd start by coming from something that maybe we do know, that we can then throw changing circumstances into and say, okay, what can we predict? Now, by my original background is I'm a psychologist. So I'll show you a typical consumer brain, which isn't there. Oh, I've missed a slide. Some questions I'm going to address. How are consumer attitudes to insurance changing? What are they going to demand in terms of price, products and prices? Do they really care about quality and product details before they claim? And what does this mean for future strategies? So maybe this isn't a consumer brain, maybe this is my brain about to come up. There we are. Okay. So psychologists sometimes term people as cognitive misers, i.e., we don't really like thinking that hard. And if you think about it, evolution has set us up in that way because we don't want to expend too much energy if we can get quite a good outcome without working too hard for it. And this means that when we make decisions, we employ all sorts of different strategies. And decision-making is an immensely complicated field. There's Nobel Prize-winning work in it, so I'm not going to pretend that I'm an expert in it. But there are some differences that can tell us about how consumers might think and make decisions. So first of all, think about people who don't have much expertise in a particular field. It might be one of yourselves, it might be a field you just don't know that much about. When we don't have much expertise, ideally what we do is look at all the information and rationalize it and think it through and weigh up alternatives and come up with the best possible option. That's not really what we do. Who's got the energy for that and the time for it? What we do is what psychologists call satisficing. We make kind of the best decision we can given the time and effort that we're willing to put into it. And in order to achieve that, less expert people will employ lots of rules of thumb or heuristics. So, for example, we might trust brand. We might say that's a kind of emotional shortcut to saying this is probably going to be a decent option for me. In the opposite side, you've also got people who are more expert, or we can all be expert in something, obviously. But if you're expert, you'll probably follow quite a different decision-making pattern. And if you think about it, when you really know about something, you've got all sorts of stored memories and you've got action plans that you've done in the past. So you'll look back into your memory and say, okay, which of these is similar to the situation I'm in now? Did the things I do then actually work? Or what would have worked? And then you replay that and you do it again. Now this has got implications for future consumers because if we look at demographic trends, oh, Again, I'm jumping past my slides, but anyway, this is a book I'm going to recommend if you are interested in this sort of stuff. How to design services and interfaces in a way that doesn't make people think. It's a really easy book to get through, and it takes about an hour and a half. And it's not hard work, but it will make you think about how to make customers not think, if you get what I mean. Coming back to demographic trends, this graph is from 2009, and it's predicting population growth in the UK in the next 20 to 30 years. There's actually been another report out in the last week. So UK population is set to reach over 70 million people, very much because of inward migration, but also because people are living longer. Most of this rise is going to be in the southeast, so there's going to be a lot of pressures on housing and so on in the southeast of England, and we're going to have more diversity in terms of ethnic groups and so on. But I think what you can see from this graph is that we've got an ageing population. Now, I think John O'Rourke said earlier on, age is not a factor, but if you think about what I said before, here's my warning sign, don't forget old people. Older people are more expert. They're more expert than younger people. So when they come to buy insurance from you and when they actually come to use the product, they're going to do it, generally speaking, in a more expert way. They've probably made a claim in the past. They've probably made lots of contracts over the period of their life, and they know they've got to look for small print. And they might be quite good at honing in at the right details. They're also increasingly going online, so even though a smaller percentage of older people are online than younger people, those who spend time online actually do far more there. Think about it. If you're retired, you've got time on your hands. So if you're like my dad, you spend half the day swearing at the computer trying to get it to buy things. So this has implications for how we actually market to consumers. Because if they're more expert, we need to make sure they've got the right information, that it's structured in the right ways. But older people might also be a little bit more set in their ways as well. So as things move on in our industry in terms of distribution channels and so on, they might not be able to keep up. So we may have a responsibility and also have opportunities by actually encouraging them to learn about new ways of doing things, new products and new distribution approaches. At the other end of the spectrum, though, we've got young people. We've got what I call the X Factor generation. I used to think I was one of them, and then about 4 years ago, I was running a focus group for Channel 5, and I felt quite close to people in the room. Then one of them said, email, that's what I use to communicate with old people. This was a 21-year-old. And that really made me just think, God, I really don't know what's going on here at all. So what are these people doing? And given that when they're buying insurance, I mean, eventually they will have experience, but at the moment they don't have, how are they going to do that? How are they going to make those decisions? So they're going to use rules of thumb. So, for example, as I said before, brand might be important, but also they'll probably rely on other people. So they might speak to mum and dad, but also they're going to use social networks. So it's been mentioned quite a lot, but I think the next slide is quite a powerful image to show just how important social networks are. So that's not the lights of the world at night time. That's actually a representation of the use of Facebook across the earth, and you can see which countries it's biased towards. But it's incredible number of people are now using social networks. And that means that they're going to be asking each other for each other's opinion when they're buying products and how to use those products. So therefore, if you're not managing and monitoring your reputation out there and encouraging a good reputation, you're going to have really good problems as a company. So it's not just about price, it's going to be about many other things as well. At the same time, there's an awful lot of pressures on consumers coming from very many different directions. We've heard this morning about how the problems in the economy. In some ways, I don't really need to labour on about them. But consumers are under price pressures. Their jobs aren't as secure as they were before. We've got inflation. We've got many, many different changes going on in the economy. And yet, insurance is kind of increasingly important to them. So this is Cumbria last year, but we've got global warming potentially, so we may have an increase in weather events. The last weekend, my girlfriend was stuck in Philadelphia for 3 days. I swear that's due to global warming. She says it's probably not. But you know, we're going to have more events like this, and that's going to bring into consumers' mind the importance of being properly insured. At the same time, they don't have as much money. We've also got things such as the volcano, so specific things that happen that make it that remind customers that they need good insurance. At the same time as this is happening, consumers have much more choice than they've ever had before. So Google has been around for a while now, but it's just at your fingertips, and you can type in, there are literally billions and billions of websites you can go to. So if you're not providing a good service and a good price, you're going to have problems. But there are also other industries that are changing expectations in consumers' minds. So sadly, Steve Jobs died a few weeks ago. Now, when he started off in the industry, computers had not really gone very far away from being punch card operated machines, and they brought in the first GUI interfaces. We'd say really what he's done is he's humanized computers. He's turned them into devices where you're not really thinking about the device anymore. It's incredibly easy to use, but also it's actually an aesthetic experience, something you might choose to do. And I'd argue that what we've not done yet is to humanize insurance. It's still full of jargon, it's still quite difficult. And so insurers that can humanize it and make it easy to do and almost a pleasant thing to do are potentially going to make some quite big wins. At the same time, consumers aren't stupid and they're not always suckered in. So probably about 6, 7 years ago when I started running usability tests, I'd have consumers with me and they'd use very hard sell websites, and they would often miss the upsells that were happening, and therefore they'd get suckered into deals that maybe they didn't particularly want. People are becoming increasingly aware of this now, and they almost expect the upsell, so they use websites in more sophisticated ways. So therefore, we ignore that at our peril. We need to be very clear with consumers and make sure they get experiences that are very easy to use. They're also becoming more sophisticated in their use of comparison websites. So there was a time when people would put all their details in, press a button, and they'd think, I'm getting an independent assessment of the market. That's exactly best deals for me. It's not happening quite so much now. We're seeing consumers using more than one comparison website. We're also seeing them then go off and look direct to see if the price is actually correct or if there's been some mismatchings and so on. They might also then call their existing insurer with the price that they've got and challenge the price and say, can you do better? So again, consumers are learning extremely rapidly, and we can only guess at how they're going to learn based on the strategies we come up with in the next few years. There are many, many other things going on in the market that are going to change consumer expectations as well. So there are changes in the law. The European Union, for example, have now banned pre-ticking on websites. So within the next 2 years, all online retailers in the UK and in Europe are going to make sure they don't pre-tick product options. It's a good thing, it's fairer for customers, but it does mean that, again, we've got all these increasing pressures on changing. And really, I suppose that's part of the message that I've got, is that the only constant is change now. Things are always, always changing, which has a lot of implications for us. We've also got the gender ruling. Who knows exactly what that's going to result in? Maybe more individual pricing, perhaps. And Mr. Straw and now Kenneth Clark are also trying to change things as well. So you might have an end to postcode pricing, referral fees, and so on. Again, this means that consumers have different expectations. The market's going to change, the type of products we're offering, the ways in which we're offering is going to change. And the particular pressure on young people. So we've got what I call the rise of the NEET, not in training, education, or employment. So we've got far higher numbers of young people who are unemployed now. They've also got the pressure of tuition fees, and it's increasingly difficult to buy a house. I'm not even that young, and I'm struggling to do this. We're increasingly going to become a nation of renters. And if you think about it, that's got implications for the type of products that are going to be important. So contents only might become more important, as well as landlords only insurance, as people are increasingly renting. But the younger generation are highly, highly adaptable, and they're what you call technological natives. So I'm a technical immigrant because I was born after a certain date and I probably didn't grow up too much with technology. But young people, a computer's not so much a computer anymore, it's just a thing that they use in their life. And with the invention of iPads and so on, they're interacting with them in all sorts of different ways. And if you can see, there's something called, I think it's called Moore's Law, which shows you how much computers have changed in processing power. This shows you how much of a geek I was when I was a kid. That was the first computer I ever used in about 1980, 81. It had 1K of memory, and you couldn't move anything around or anything. We then moved to computers that were actually quite attractive to look at and really quite powerful. And eventually we got to smartphones. These things wouldn't have been allowed in or out of the US a few years ago because they would have been classed as supercomputers and military weapons. And if you look at what you can do with these things now, it's really amazing. And I would predict that tablet devices are going to become much more important. So as people's laptops wear out and they look to replace them, what are you going to do? You probably think, actually, they look quite nice because they're not really like computers and I can watch a DVD on them. Not everyone's going to get a tablet, but I think they're going to become more and more important, and you can already see that around you. And I suppose this plethora of different devices means that we're getting to quite an interesting point, because it means there's lots and lots of data about us going around in the world. So comparison websites hold all sorts of data about us in terms of our product holdings. And there's a concept that was come up from a guy in America called the personal information cloud. It's basically a cloud of information all about us that's out there somewhere, and we need to be able to access it. And the way in which we access it needs to change according to the context that we're currently in, the type of device that we're using. And that means that we need to be incredibly flexible from a platform point of view and thinking about our strategies, because if we don't do that, we're just going to be left behind. There are many other things coming. I'll go through this quickly, but this is augmented reality, so you can hold your phone up and actually overlay information on the environment. And near-field communications, who knows what's going to come from this? But basically, these are chips that will go in the back of your mobile phone. It's already happening in Japan, and it will happen here soon. And you'll be able to swipe them against things in your environment and buy things directly or interact. It's a move towards maybe a cashless society. Can't really predict what that's going to mean for insurance. Maybe each time you buy something, you'll swipe it, and it'll automatically go on your home insurance policy. But all these things means that consumers are going to be doing things that we can't predict, we can't understand. So they might well run rings around us like they did the police. A few brands are doing really well, though. They're keeping up. So, for example, First Direct have their labs. And this is a kind of social media approach to actually understanding their consumer needs. So they've built up a community of consumers. They throw out product propositions to them. Their new homepage goes up there and people vote on it, for example. It's a really good way of both doing marketing but also doing research and understanding and engaging with your consumers. Another company is giffgaff, which is an offshoot of O2, I believe. They're going to market with a new mobile phone company without using any traditional marketing whatsoever. So they're just using social media in order to market their new product and actually launch it. So you can do things such as send your friend a SIM card. And now you can imagine from a viral point of view that explodes because that person sends it on, they get a few credits, and then they become loyal giffgaff people. You can imagine for our industry, this might have really interesting possibilities. And then there's a rise of different types of media through digital channels as well. You've got videos and so on. So consumers are increasingly looking at videos and breaking out of your traditional way of thinking about how people work online. Older people, people with less verbal ability, may rely more on media like this rather than the written word. And imagine a quote page, for example, that used video rather than lots of little boring bullet points. Could be potentially quite a powerful thing. So, to wind up, what does all this mean for future strategies? It is impossible to predict, but I think there are things that we can do. It's really essential to watch what consumers are doing on an ongoing basis. So I'm going to use a phrase that one of my old bosses used to use, and it sounds like real jargon, but he used to say, you should be on the trailing edge of the leading edge. So essentially, if you know what the leading edge is and you're watching what consumers are doing, they may do things that you don't expect. But as long as you're watching, you can catch up really, really quickly. You don't have to invest on being the completely new cutting-edge thing, but you can still capitalize it on extremely quickly. So therefore, I'd say, particularly watch young and early adopters. Young people and early adopters of technologies do things with technology you may never have been able to predict. So, for example, text messages was a type of guerrilla development. I mean, an SMS is a really poor communication tool if you think about it in principle, but actually it's really taken off because it fits in with many things that we naturally do. So guerrilla development is very important, and we need to monitor those markets in order to understand what's happening. That means we need to be able to react extremely quickly with flexible technology, because things will move quickly, and if we can't keep up, we'll have problems. And we need to measure and react to the right things. So I'm from customer insights background nowadays. A lot of what we do is about measuring customer responses to us. One thing is a net promoter score. So this is quite a controversial score in market research circles. Came from a group called Baines, who have said it's the score most correlated with business growth. And what it is would you recommend us to a friend or colleague? If people score you 0 to 6 on a scale of 0 to 10, you're a detractor. You'll probably say bad things about the company. If it's a 9 or 10, you're a promoter. You'll probably say good things. Take the percentage of detractors away from the percentage of promoters, you get your net promoter score. And if you think in a world where social networks and so on are so important, and your reputation is so important, scores like that can be extremely useful, even though, as I say, they're a bit controversial. There are also competing scores, like a customer effort score. So if making things easy and simple is so important, measuring the amount of effort it takes for customers to engage with you is a really essential thing to do. So measuring the right things can help you actually work out whether your business is doing well and how you need to react. I'd also say you need to carry out user-centered design. So if you read that book, Don't Make Me Think, you'll understand that. But essentially, it's about carrying out product and interface development processes that really make things easy to use for customers and really center on them and their needs. And then finally, I'd say you need to monitor and manage the online buzz. What's being said about you out there in the social networks, make sure you can actually react to it. But when it comes down to it, provide a really, really good service and people will be saying good things about you. So that's it. Thank you very much.